My name's Alistair MacDonald from Viet Capital Securities. I'm delighted this morning to welcome Richard Burridge, who is the Managing Director and founder of Cimigo, which is a consumer goods and market research consultancy based here in Ho Chi Minh City, but with extensive operations and experience around the region. The best thing that I can do at this point is to get out of the way and turn it over to Richard, who will give us a presentation on his outlook for consumer trends. We will allow some time after the presentation for questions and answers. So thank you very much for joining us, and Richard, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Alistair, and Viet Capital. It's very nice to be back. Nice to have all the audience here too. So this is me, hopefully looking pretty similar to the picture. I've been here in Vietnam since 1997. I'm from London. I have 3 children who are all born here, and I run a market research agency called Cimigo, and our role in life is really to help our clients make better commercial and marketing decisions. What I really want to focus on today is the trends that are happening in the market, very much from a consumer perspective, and looking at the impact that's happened on their attitude and their behavior particularly. Really as an overview, the sort of key metrics that are going on. This is 2020 metrics. We're looking now at a population of 97 coming on 98 million. The Vietnamese government reevaluated and recalibrated their GDP measurement in 2019, which gave the economy a rather large shift. It's now at 340 billion, which was a very good growth given the circumstances of just under 3%, giving us a GDP per capita of about $3,500. Some of the things I'll be talking about today are the internet economy, now worth 15 billion. Retail sales haven't quite recovered as much as domestic demand as we see in the export demand, but I'll talk about that too. For those of you who are interested in the social space and communication space, we can see the numbers of the popular Zalo, which is a WhatsApp or a Viber equivalent produced by Vinagame, and Facebook, of course, being a very dominant media outlet and communications outlet today. This is largely driven by the huge growth we've seen in the last 10 years of smartphones. So we've now got adults 15 plus, 9 in 10 of them have a smartphone in their pocket. We're seeing about $3 billion being spent on advertising. Cars per day, 812 new cars per day. That's down from 885 in 2019, but still pretty strong. Apartments have lost a lot. Last 2019, we saw 88,000 new apartments sold across 3 cities. In 2020, partly due to supply, but also partly due to cautious expending on big ticket items, we saw 18,500 new apartments sold. And we've seen a big rise in the last few years of the banked population. So 18 plus adults now, nearly 2/3 have a bank account. So it's pretty phenomenal progress despite COVID. We can certainly say that the economy in nearly all sectors, beyond some obvious ones, has very much bounced back. This is very much due to the policy of protecting people's health while safeguarding the economy. It's sort of a known mantra of the government. These are the COVID levels as of a couple of days ago. So compared to the rest of the world, the management and community spread has been very low. The management's been phenomenal. This is a chart I stole from the FT and updated with 2020 data, but you know, across the horizontal axis, you've got the COVID deaths per 100,000 as of a few days ago, and you've got GDP growth for 2020. So Vietnam came in at 2.91%, only really outpaced by Taiwan at 2.98%. And you can see some of the markets which are quite suffering in Southeast Asia, Philippines at -10%, and a lot of deaths. Indonesia's fared well, better in its economy, but still -2%, and COVID is not being well managed there. Malaysia is a good example. far more deaths than we see in Vietnam, and -6%. So we can see that the policy of the government has worked extraordinarily well. In absolute size, Vietnam is now the 4th largest economy in Southeast Asia. We surpassed in 2020 both Malaysia and Singapore, not on a per capita level, but on an absolute size level. And if we look at per capita income, then 3,500 for Vietnam, slightly behind Indonesia, but just skipped ahead of the Philippines in 2020. Obviously, if we look at the more developed countries where there's a per capita income of over 25,000, we've got a long way to go in order to reach those sort of levels, but it certainly provides a good reference point on Vietnam's economic progress. This is the sort of key data coming out of 2020. So this is year-end 2020 compared to 2019. So just some things to highlight. Very good surplus when you compare exports and imports, and reasonably good growth despite it all. Retail sales, very much subdued. We're used to double-digit increases per annum in retail sales. We'll be talking about that as we go through. But foreign direct investment was still rather healthy at 20 billion. So we saw a lockdown in March and April, parts of March and parts of April. We saw quite a large scare in central Vietnam in August, and this is the impact that it had on the Vietnam Purchasing Managers Index. What we see is since October, manufacturing output increased and consistently increased and increasingly increased, particularly into Q1 of 2021. So manufacturing has certainly bounced back, and that's really important because it provides a lot of jobs added to the country, and it's also a significant contributor to GDP. Most of you, I think Alistair talked about it earlier, the sheer number of trading agreements that Vietnam has, and Vietnam is also leading the charts on its inter-global trade. It's got an index now of 159%. There's nobody higher at the moment. We're also attracting a lot of new manufacturing, and one of the reasons amongst many would be the minimum wages at $191 in Saigon per month versus $326 in Guangzhou. And in Saigon, that's the highest level of the minimum wage across the country. So that sees in Q1, we see that growth is very much recovering at nearly 4.5%. Retail sales not fully recovered yet, but recovering at 5.1% growth. And we also see a significant rise in exports and imports. Of course, this is skewed because we're comparing to Q1 2020, but there's still significant numbers and really keeping in line with the sort of levels we expect to see in Q4 of any year. So very strong export growth and manufacturing. There are job losses, of course, and there were job losses last year, so the job market hasn't fully recovered. And the forecast from the government is 6.5%, but Viet Capital are forecasting slightly higher. So who's won, who's lost? Let's have a look at the consumer space and think about the impact on incomes and spend. Before I do that, there's two key attitudes that have really changed over this period. There's a lot of hype in this space, but Vietnam has always been very nationalistic. It couldn't have got hotter. It really has, because the public are very impressed with the government's management and the country's outstanding example on the global landscape. So nationalism has certainly been improved for Vietnam. It was already extremely strong. If you've ever watched Vietnam play football, that would be a prime example. And the other area is health and attitudes to health and lifestyle. So lockdown periods, work from home and so on, put a renewed emphasis and accelerated people's attitudes to what they're putting in their body, how they treat their body, and trying to maintain positive health levels in the light of a global pandemic. Huge growth in things like yoga, in bike events, biking, and running. So some positive impacts towards attitudes. Of course, some people have been quite severely impacted. We saw nearly 1.6 million jobs lost in 2020, even in Q1, another 180,000 jobs lost. Fortunately, in Vietnam, in large, it's an agricultural society, so people can return home, and the rural landscape really provides a sponge. doesn't necessarily give people a good income, but it gives them a place to live, food to eat. Unfortunately, whilst they're there, they do remain grossly underemployed. They may have some work, but certainly not enough work to keep a 40-hour week alive. Huge job losses, primarily in tourism, hospitality, and during those periods of lockdown and the early periods of COVID in manufacturing. Those jobs in manufacturing have largely come back. Anecdotally, many of my friends in that sector are struggling to find the staff they need today. Just want to recap on the economic class distribution. So this is household monthly income distribution, moving from the left to A class of just over $1,000 to F on the far right at below $215. But just to put it in perspective, we've got 27 million households, and about 12 million of those would fall into A, B, C, D, which we would call the consuming class, in that they have a discretionary income. Now, the reason I show you this, I just want to highlight that most of the people who've been impacted and had income shortfalls over 2020 really come from the far right of E and F class. So unfortunately, the poorest households have been the hardest hit. Households' income on average dropped 12% in 2020. So that's almost equivalent to a month's salary. And of course, as an average, it masks the effects on some households, which were far more severe. 90% will recover to the levels of household income that we saw in 2019 by the time we hit Q3 this year. The big impact was really on savings. So people's savings rate rapidly declined. It is recovering again now, and the rate will be fully recovered by the end of this year. And the nest eggs that they were holding in savings, of course, have been diminished while income was short. And those nest eggs will take a little longer to recover up until the end of 2022. So if we look at the households that hardest hit, particularly areas where tourism, hospitality, small trading owners, shop owners, particularly tailors, mechanics, and so on, and blue-collar production employees were the households that were largest hit. Vietnamese households have, or Vietnamese individuals, working individuals, on average have 1.7 sources of income. And often it was their secondary source of income that was hardest hit. And those secondary sources were typically small trading stores, trading online, trading enterprises, where they saw their income reduced, also significant losses in overtime income for many. Provinces with a high concentration of tourism, so Binh Thuan, Da Nang, Can Hoa, and provinces with a high concentration of manufacturing, so Dong Nai in the south or Binh Phuc in the north, were also where households were hardest hit, because they were where either overtime disappeared or there were job losses, albeit temporarily, in manufacturing production units. Typically, they were in the lower economic class, and typically the job losses were more severe amongst those in over 40, so middle-aged and up. Those in the largest cities of Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi found more alternatives for employment. Younger employees were just more agile. White-collar roles were certainly more secure, and the skills more transferable, and providing some agility for those consumers. So what was the consumer impact? How did this impact their spend? Despite all of this, consumer packaged goods largely grew, but they grew at a slower pace than those manufacturers are used to, and certainly a slower pace than 2019, but they still largely grew despite it all. There was a derailing of the premiumization, so a lot of consumers downtraded. They were thrifty in their expenditure. They looked for better value offers. So there's been a trend over the last decade of up trading, and that was reversed quite quickly. And that's going to continue through to 2021, primarily, not necessarily all because of income, but primarily because of attitude and experience. People have become accepting of that shampoo or that detergent or that food product, and it's going to take a while for the marketing machine to play through and start convincing people to uptrade again. The uptrade will come back, but not until 2022. A lot of high ticket items, so washing machines, cars, two-wheeler motorbikes, and so on, those purchases were put on hold or delayed, and that we expect to see those recovering in Q4 of this year. So discretionary expenditure was certainly reevaluated. Travel was restricted, of course, and and plans for travel, domestic travel, remained very cautious, volatile due to local periodic COVID outbreaks, and also meant people stayed closer to home. Out-of-home entertainment was very much held back. It has since rebounded, but again, even this week, it's probably contracted a little in the very short term because there's some localized scares causing that volatility. Interesting, the super premium sector, it doesn't matter whether it was cars, jewelry, or consumer packaged goods, that maintained. So that growth continued. There wasn't a decline in those areas. So the very wealthy stayed very wealthy and stayed spending. So if we look at what really shrank in 2020, from a domestic point of view, of course, outbound travel, out-of-home entertainment, domestic travel, eating out of home, spa and beauty services out of home definitely shrank. So to the left-hand side of the screen was the highest impact, to the right-hand side of the screen was the lowest impact. Apartments, partly supply, but also demand, cars, two-wheelers, home appliances, fashion, not sports apparel, that was a positive, but other fashion items, bags, clothes, etc. Part of the discretionary income that was not spent. Devices, home furnishing domestically. The furniture market, export market has done phenomenally well over the last 18 months. And then if we look at growth areas that were accelerated, some of these I'll be talking about in a little bit more detail as we go through, but online shopping saw a rapid boost, down trading in CPG, delivery and ride hailing services, gaming, not gambling, gaming, content streaming, e-wallets, edutech. So a lot of entertainment and education services online. These are going to endure. So the top side of the screen are areas that will continue to accelerate and will endure beyond COVID. At the bottom are areas that were really a reaction to COVID, and I don't expect to endure in the long term. They may well endure for the better part of this year, but in the longer term or even the medium term, we wouldn't expect to see these enduring. Some of the largest increases in consumer product goods were sanitizers, masks, as you can imagine, soap, anything to do with body wash, hand wash, and interestingly, mouthwash. Food and beverage delivery was accelerated. Packaged foods were accelerated. Part of that was to do with stocking up at home in case of more lockdowns. Health and nutrition supplements, books and stationery, electrical accessories rather than high-ticket items, and sports apparel, be it yoga, be it cycling, be it running, but sports apparel still grew in the local market. So online shopping grew to represent just over 4% of all retail sales of grocery. So if we look at this chart, let me just explain it. It's over time, 15 to 20. Traditional trade is the blue bar. So in 2015, the traditional trade, which is mum and pop shops, wet markets, neighborhood stores, that has gone from 83% to 74% of contribution. Of course, retail sales have grown over this period. I'm just showing contributions. The orange line there is the modern trade. So that generally means there's a checkout counter and there's aircon in the shop. So think supermarkets, mini markets, convenience stores. That is now 22%, and e-commerce is 4.3% now, having grown from under 0.5% in 2015. The line through it all is the number of retail outlets that are a modern trade format, seen huge growth since 2018, now at just over 7,000 stores nationally. Bacrois Sun, which is from Taoyi Didong, which is Mobile World Group, has been the leader in store expansions over this period. Vinmart, now owned by Massan, has been a huge contributor. Pharmacity in pharmacy and personal care has been a significant grower, as has Saigon Co-op Mart. But the largest by far has been Bacrois Sun. Bacrois Sun is a mini market format. It kind of looks like a cross between a fresh market although indoors and with aircon and a checkout counter, and a lot of CPG products. So they've done very well, and they've also pushed out quite substantially out of the key metropolitan cities of Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, gone far more provincial and even into rural areas to find new customers as they've expanded their outlet presence. So we really expect online shopping to surpass modern trade formats in the next 5 years or so. It's really reached a tipping point. F&B delivery services drove confidence and trust in the idea of online shopping initially, if I go back 3 or 4 years. COVID has really helped push it further and give greater confidence and greater transactions and greater transaction value to the online shopping space. Over that period of time, we've seen logistics and delivery times improve exponentially. So there's some significant changes in channel, and we expect particularly the online aspect of that to carry on at an exponential growth rate. From humans to algorithms, so marketing is increasingly moving away from humans and relying on algorithms to talk to us. You know, just as for edutainment, you know, social, people are spending on average just over 2 hours a day on social, so that's Zalo and Facebook primarily. It's also some Discord and other items for a younger group like Instagram. And TV, video content delivery, a lot of it not being terrestrial television, but digital and over-the-top platforms. 2 hours and 40 minutes spent on that. And I'm only showing you those two aspects. There's also where people read their news and other things that they're doing on an online environment that take the total time up to over 6 hours per day per person. So you can imagine why marketers now use algorithms in the way they speak to us. It certainly changes a shift in focus and purchase priorities between generations. So if we look at those who are a little older, more closer to my age, those still slightly younger, long-term planning, work hard, and thinking about the future was very much their outlook on life. Those much younger are now looking at living for the moment. Income previously was spent on savings and gathering assets. Income now is very much more geared to experiences and to creating memories, really creating Facebook and social media posts primarily, more so than spending money on possessions. And historically, there was a narrow definition of success, which was very much your job title, the possessions, the property you owned, and success has really evolved in its aspect for the younger generation. It's about being happy, it's about being fulfilled, it's about getting recognition, and a lot of that recognition coming from a social environment. So the mobile and social space is really changing the way people interact with a lot of goods and services. Obviously, there's new content platforms for almost everything, or new platforms for almost everything, and a lot more to come. And there's also financing arrangements, and particularly consumer financing from consumer finance companies, but also the banks that are helping make purchases and access to items and change priorities in the way people buy. We've got smaller household sizes, which also changes priorities. We've got people changing the way they live, particularly in metropolitan cities, so a lot more apartments living than dual generation homes. We've got a far lower birth rate, which we'll talk about later. All of this is having an impact on how people spend their money and what they prioritize their expenditure for. Consumer finance, 66 billion in consumer finance in 2020. Not as strong growth as we've seen in prior years, but still growth of nearly 9%, representing 19% of GDP or 40% of retail sales in 2020. The internet economy approaching 15 billion, that's 4.3% of GDP. Still a lot of domestic travel within that, online shopping, moved from 38% in 2019 to 47% of the internet economy. Advertising, media, gaming, 22%, ride-hailing, 11%. So significant growth in the internet economy. 2019, it was at 12 billion. In 2015, it was at only 3 billion. So the digital transformation that you're all experiencing at work is also being experienced by consumers in nearly every aspect of their life today. I want to talk about the demographic dividend. We've been very lucky. Any one of you have visited Vietnam, you can feel the buzz, you can feel the dynamism that Vietnam has. That's why we all keep coming back or choose to stay here. And that dividend is going to continue until 2030. But I want to talk about how it's going to change subsequently to that. We also have a new city that I thought I'd quickly introduce you to. So last year, Ho Chi Minh City, District 2, 9, and Thu Duc districts were separated from Ho Chi Minh City, and a new city was created called Thu Duc City. And Thu Duc City is now the 3rd largest city in Vietnam, one that you've probably never heard of, and it jumped straight into the number 3 spot with a population of 1.1 million. Ho Chi Minh City now has 5.9 million population, Hanoi just under 4 million. Some of you are probably thinking, well, I read the press and the press claims that the population of Ho Chi Minh City is 10 million or 9 million. This data is from the latest census and then projected into 2020, but a lot of journalists misread the data that they see in statistical yearbooks. They take urban populations and rural populations, because even Ho Chi Minh City is a province, it has a rural population. Hanoi's population as a province almost doubles if you take into the rural population into account. So beware of the hype. The cities aren't as big as people make them out to be, but you can see the relative ranking of the cities there. So this is the largest urban populations, city populations. There are, of course, a lot of commuters, particularly in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, who will increase that population by daylight hours by about 1 million in each city. So the biggest shifts in the population strata are really the declining age, so lower birth rates, far less young people than we're used to. The rural population has stopped growing and is now shrinking. The urban population is increasing. Alistair referred to that earlier. And the older generation, the silver generation, those of us over 50, is the fastest increasing part of the population. And in fact, if I go to 80 plus, that's very much the fastest, then 70, then 60, then 50. And this is fine for now. It doesn't really impact the demographic dividend that we're experiencing and the dynamism that we're experiencing, but it will start to. And that's just some of the things I want to highlight. So here is the rural-urban divide. So rural is the green, urban is the blue. So we're at 37% today of an urban population. By 2036, that's going to increase to 45%. That's wonderful for the property sector, the apartment owners and builders. It's wonderful for the retail chains, and it's wonderful consumer goods, ride-hailing services, etc., because it's far more efficient for them to provide and service those urban populations. It also makes it a little bit harder for consumers to grow, for manufacturers to grow CPG in rural households, in rural areas. It's a lot of distribution points for a falling population. Rural household sizes have gone from 4.6 in 2008 to 3.6 in 2020. So that essentially means they're smaller, obviously, but they're also slightly wealthier. There's less dependence relying on the income for that household. And then if we look at the other aspect, which is age, then we can see at the top of the chart from 2020, 24% of the population are over 50, and that's going to increase to 36%. Let's put that another way. If we look at 0 to 14-year-olds, it's 22% today, and 14 to 29-year-olds is 23%. So we've got 45% of the population under 30, and that's going to decrease to 37% by 2036. Birth rate's seen a really, really strong decline, much stronger than any actuary would envision. It's gone from 75 per 1,000 females in 2008 to 46 in 2020. That is a huge diminishing birth rate. And let's remember that it's the youth of Vietnam that has really provided the demographic dividend to date, and the dynamism that we all feel when we visit. We now need to think, and certainly as marketers and commercial enterprises in our long-term planning, we need to think about the silver generation and how we make better choices in the goods and services that we're going to provide them and the homes we're going to provide them as we go into the long-term future. The other demographic dividend that is extremely important is the labor force. You know, if we look at adults 20 to 64, 96% of men are working in Vietnam, 88% of women are working. Now, the women is the factor that really contributes to our GDP because it's far higher than we see in anywhere else. It's far higher than we see in our neighbors. And if we look in places like India, where it's under 15%, you can imagine what a contribution that women are making to Vietnam's GDP. And a part of that is the low dependency ratio. So the dependency ratio is just 0.7 persons per employed person, which really helps our economic progress. You know, Vietnam is a market, you've been here 24 years now, and it's a market that is very, very good at leapfrogging the development paths of mature markets. So just some examples, but you know, we're now topping Southeast Asian clean energy output. VinFast from Vingroup has become, I think, the 5th largest by market share car producer in Vietnam in just 4 years. And they've just launched their first fully electric car. That's a picture of it. We're seeing great strides and growth in social selling and live stream selling, much like press talks about in China, but that has been nascent here, but is growing exponentially over the last 6 months. Mobile payments really leapfrogging credit cards. 17 billion spent on credit cards in the first half of 2020 compared to 210 billion on mobile payments. That's not just Momo and e-wallets, that's bank mobile payments as well. But you've probably all heard about Momo, which is by far the largest e-wallet provider in the marketplace. Gaming and esports have been propelled, edutech, medical, healthcare tech, nascent, but they're making good inroads because Vietnam has a population and a disposition towards technology and convenience that is really helping new launches get a grip in the market and get a hold. Mobile content platforms are really phenomenal as well. All of these, except the first two, have very much been enabled and accelerated in their adoption in the market, partly because of COVID. So 2020 has really helped a lot of players get significant ground and gains in the market. So I want to wrap up just with the key points. So Vietnam's government authorities have done an extremely good job, as you're all aware. But of course, household incomes have fallen 12% on average. But of course, some households, particularly in the lower economic spectrum, have been much harder hit. Business has bounced back beyond tourism and hospitality, which of course is still suffering the lack of inbound tourists. Export-bound manufacturing has performed really strongly, and Vietnam today remains the most interconnected trading nation globally. So its prospects for manufacturing and export remain very strong. The attitudinal impact, there's a lot of different factors, but it's really national pride and behaviors and attitudes towards health and caring for one's health that has been spurred the most over the last year. Behavioral impact, CPG still grew largely, most sectors, but there was some derailing of the premiumization. Obviously, people being more thrifty, a delay in durables and high ticket items that is starting to recover already and will be fully recovered by the end of the year. Digital transformation has really accelerated trends in edutainment and shopping online, and online is really going to start surpassing modern trade sales. Certainly by 2028, I suspect might even be a little bit earlier. Structural changes, important not to forget. Rapid urbanization provides high efficiency and convenience, but it does provide challenges in infrastructure and pollution. Rural population shrinking very fast. Migration to urban areas, lower birth rates means that the rural households are certainly a lot smaller and slightly wealthier in that progression. We're also seeing digital and modern trade expansion into the rural areas. So Bakwasan is certainly a leader in the modern trade areas, but logistics companies are doing much better at providing delivery from e-commerce to rural households today. So that is just going to propel what is already a trend much faster. We've got a great demographic dividend to date, low dependency ratio on earners. We do have, however, a staggering drop in the birth rate, and an aging population will take hold in the 2030s, but it'll become a key challenge for the government, for society, and for policy in the 2040s. So we're going to see much faster change going through to 2030. Great economic process. It's the best. The next 10 years, I believe, are going to be the best time to be doing business in Vietnam or to be investing in Vietnam. There's going to be sector-wide tech adoption, and Vietnam will continue to leapfrog the development paths that those of you overseas might have seen in your markets, which have been much more sequential and slower. So that's really a wrap up from me. That's just a summary of the key points I wanted to raise. And you can download this presentation. You may well have been sent it already. If you haven't, you can download it here. And if you have any questions for me outside of this forum, then just drop me an email there at ask@cimigo.com. I'll be happy to get back to you. So now I'm going to hand back to Alistair and any Q&A that might have arisen.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. That was a fascinating presentation, and it has elicited, as you might imagine, some questions from our clients. So maybe I could start with this one. What is the source of your figure for e-commerce growth? I think you cited growth in e-commerce by as much as 56%.
Yeah.
And can you please provide a breakdown of what kinds of goods that fueled this growth? This client also comments that from their conversations with both e-commerce platforms and e-logistics companies, their sense is that the growth is actually much lower than the figure that you're quoting.
Yeah. So the data comes from 3 areas. So it comes from GSO retail sales. It comes from the I'm just going to find it, the Temasek Google study on the internet economy, and it's a combination of those that look at the contribution to the retail sales, and it's the growth level is coming from that Temasek Google survey.
Okay.
Please, whoever that is asking, feel free to email me and I'll send you the sources. I mean, I'll send you the documents that provide the sources.
All right, fantastic, thank you. Maybe just a follow-up question on that whole area. I think there's perhaps a risk that we perceive anything modern as essentially a development that's going to compete only with traditional retailing. So, you know, we talk a lot about the shift from traditional mom and pop retailers to modern trade. But I think listening to your presentation, you're also suggesting that e-commerce and online sales are actually a bit of a threat to modern trade retailing itself, even perhaps more so than traditional retailers. How should we view that kind of triangle between the 3 different channels?
Yeah, so I mean, modern trade, of course, has been the challenger to the traditional trade, and it's been a hard shift. I mean, look, it's moved from, you know, the modern trade has moved from 17% to 22% over those 5 years. Obviously, that's masking the natural growth in retail sales. And part of the reason for that is traditional trade. You have probably someone you've shopped with for a very long time, and you know and knows you, and provides a very good service to you. But of course, yeah, the e-commerce is really fighting against both, and frankly, is often doing so. I don't believe any of the providers are currently making any of the key e-commerce channels are currently making profits. So they're doing so at cost of goods to the retail pricing to the consumer below their costs. So the price competition coming from e-commerce is really immense, and that will be impacting modern trade. So very much they all compete. I suspect increasingly we will see e-commerce be using traditional trade as distribution and collection points as they expand more rurally. And I suspect some of the modern trade providers that we see today will also be expanding their e-commerce services so that they can provide an omni service to the consumer. So I suspect these modern trade retailers will also become significant e-commerce providers as well, particularly in the area of grocery.
Right, thank you. I've got another question from a client here. Do you see any indicators of expansion of low-cost providers of consumer goods beyond the scale of normal supermarkets? In other words, could there be a Costco in Vietnam in the near future?
I don't see it thus far. It doesn't mean it's not an opportunity. So, I mean, I'm always surprised if we take mall development in Vietnam and you compare it to mall development in Manila or Jakarta. The malls are all very upper mainstream premium and actually probably skewed to premium. If you walk into many of the malls outside of central Jakarta and outside of central Manila, then a lot of the malls are really catering to a D&E class type consumer. We don't have those malls yet here. So I think it's certainly an opportunity, but I haven't seen it yet.
Interesting, thank you. Okay, moving on to another question, perhaps going back to the differential impact that you highlighted on different kind of income brackets as a result of COVID. I mean, this is something I think that we've seen reflected in various share prices in the stock market as well. So it's pretty clear that unfortunately the lower income consumers been hit harder, but perhaps you could give us a bit more insight into the timeline that you're anticipating for spending recovery in the various segments. I suppose in stock market terms, when should you buy Vina milk rather than Veen or whatever?
Yeah, I think, if you take a CPG perspective, I think the wealth and the household incomes will be recovering this year, but the thriftiness will maintain, not so much because of the income is no longer there. Part of it is to regain my savings nest, and part of it is because I've down traded, and you know what, it's okay. And it's really going to take time to rebuild the marketing messages that are going to convince the consumer to trade back up again. So I don't expect that trading up to happen again until 2022. Obviously, not everyone is uniform, so some will have done it already, but it's still going to be hanging around this year for sure, in terms of the more value for money offers. But next year, I would say the majority would start to be moving, but this year the majority would still be thrifty.
Okay, moving on to another question we have here. I mean, I thought it was fascinating your demographic projections about how the population mix will change here by age group, but also some of the insights into the different mindsets, different generations. What structural change do you think this shift in the population will have as today's millennials and Gen Z generation become an increasingly dominant force in the overall spending mix?
So actually, can you just repeat the question? What change will happen to consumer goods or to?
Yes, so in practical terms, I mean, you explained very clearly how someone from an older generation, your my generation, let's say, was sort of brought up in a certain mindset that this is what you should do. This is you should work hard, near term, etc. Whereas the the younger generation today is more about the immediate experience, and why should I own consumer goods when I can just
understand.
buy
Yeah.
right share, etc. So
Yeah.
just trying to understand what impact, perhaps more quantitatively, that might actually have.
Yeah. So I mean, some good examples would be for the younger generation, far more, putting COVID aside, far more willing to spend on experiences. So whether that's trying new things, travel. Before COVID, the increases in international travel, primarily within Asia, where the food options are still safe and they're not too far from home, had been phenomenal. So if you go back to this presentation for 2018, it shows you the growth of expenditure and consumers willing to travel and traveling overseas, or to travel for unique experiences. So, historically, I'd be happy to go to Nha Trang or Vung Tau from Saigon to have a beach holiday. Now I'm happy to go trekking in the Northern Mountains, for example. So something that shows experience, something that I can post. I'm happy to learn new skills. I'm happy to try running a half marathon. All these aspects, whether it's a artisan coffee shop or whether it's a new Thai restaurant, it's all about experiences that I can share, and I can share socially and hopefully get the likes. Whilst the older generation, from that structural change, are going to be faced with some new issues in that they're no longer going to be living primarily in the metropolitan cities. They're not going to be living in multi-generational homes. They're going to be living alone. There's not going to be a security net of younger generation households contributing to the household budget. There's going to be a lot of people in the younger generation living in apartments in metropolitan cities with, frankly, no room for in-laws or parents. So there's going to be some fundamental shifts in how this generation is going to have to care for their parents and grandparents.
Okay. Great, thank you. Moving on to another question that's just come in here. Going back to COVID, I mean, as you explained clearly, Vietnam overall has done a fantastically good job in terms of controlling the virus, etc. But we are again currently right now seeing some renewed outbreaks here and there. How do you think these periodic outbreaks are going to impact the overall sort of consumption market, perhaps over the next 6 to 12 months? And in conjunction with that, how does the rather slow pace of vaccination rollout here, do you think, is that going to impact the prospects both for domestic consumption but also for Vietnam to reopen to international tourists?
Yeah. On the first one, it's really volatility and discretionary spend. So from thriftiness to out-of-home expenditure, or the willingness to be out of home or to even travel domestically, is really fluctuating a lot with those localized outbreaks that we're seeing of COVID at the moment. Assuming it doesn't cause another full lockdown, then I think economic activity will continue in good stead, and savings will continue, and the ability to rebuild saving levels will continue. In terms of the lack of vaccination, there is a vaccination program, but of course it's the supply issues, and it's going to be a long time before the population is vaccinated. Given the government's stated mantra of protecting public health and safeguarding the economy, I do not think it'll be easy for people to travel to Vietnam this year or next year.
Yeah, so current speculation of travel bubble corridors with places like Thailand are probably a little bit premature at this stage.
I think so. And if you think of the public's attitude to the way Vietnam has managed the economy, there's a hidden message in that, which is the stability of political power. The government is doing the right thing, and I think they will absolutely do their best to minimize the risk. And I don't think that will include opening borders or having travel bubbles anytime soon.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. You highlighted national pride in Vietnam as being very prominent, and indeed I remember when I first moved here a few years ago, one of the first things I experienced was indeed Vietnam playing football, and it was pretty clearly a national event. In terms of consumer branding, how valid a proposition is it for a consumer product to be branded in some way, trying to align it as a sort of national champion? I suppose we're thinking partly about the beer market here, but it could apply equally to a wider range of products. Or is that in fact a rather dangerous strategy in some ways?
No, I think if you're a local manufacturer, you know, some good examples. You talk about beer, but you can look at Habaco and Sabaco, Hanoi beer, and Saigon beer. Although Saigon's probably no longer Vietnamese, but historically it was, and most of the public would think it is. You know, of course, it's very strong to play on your local or your national product. Another good example would be Bittis. You know, Bittis is in the shoe market and the trainer market, and they've done a great job at propelling their marketing around. Be proud of what we're making in Vietnam. It's fashionable, it's cool, and it's high quality. You know, when I arrived in Vietnam, the biggest selling infant formula was Vinamilk, and it came in a purple can that was very dull and had very little on its face and its packaging, and it almost looked like gasoline. Now, if you look at what Vinamilk has achieved in its status in the market, its marketing is world class, its packaging is world class, its products are world class. It's come a very long way, and for many years, international competition held the top spots in that arena. But now Vinamilk does by a long way. And they actively, if you went back to 2000, I'm guessing roughly 2008, 9, 10, ran campaigns to reassure and to heighten the awareness and the pride in a product made in Vietnam, which was nutrition for Vietnamese people and a comprehending of what Vietnamese people needed in their nutrition and the quality that was possible in Vietnam. So they turned a market around that was very internationally aspirational for mothers, you know, taking what was probably their most important decisions on what to feed their firstborn child, and turned it around into essentially nationalism, and taking a nationalism-driven strategy and building confidence within the consumer. So well done. Vinamilk is a great example from history. Bittis is a good example. Well done. It's a very powerful mantra.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question just come in here from a client. Do Vietnamese consumers expect faster delivery times now compared to the past few years? Do we have any data? And if this is indeed the case, that expectations for faster delivery times have changed, how have the companies been adjusting to that?
So delivery, first of all, yes, they do expect faster delivery times, but they've got them. So, you know, the benchmark is moving all the time, right? So a delivery time 3 years ago compared to today has changed dramatically. The biggest barrier for people clicking buy on an e-commerce site is delivery time. So in a lot of categories, if it's not a repeat purchase, people are excited to get the product. And if the delivery time is too long, it may sway them not to click that buy button. I'm not informed enough to know how the logistics companies have done this, but there are quite a few new operators in that space who are really providing a very phenomenal service. So the generic answer is yes, and delivery times really matter in people's choices and decisions. A lot of consumers are looking at comparison websites, and they're not only comparing price, but they're also comparing delivery times.
Right. And perhaps a follow-up question on that. I mean, if you were advising a consumer goods producer who said to you, look, I've really got to get better in terms of how quickly I can deliver the product, generically, I mean, would you be advising them to try and build their own logistics capability in that regard, or would you tend to favour outsourcing? I mean, are there some great logistics providers out there that you would say, no, just go to these guys and they'll do it for you?
Yeah, my default position on that would be is focus on what you do well, and I suspect that a manufacturer is not great at logistics. It might be great at distributing to wholesalers and retailers on a fixed schedule, but they're not going to be great at delivering to the home and handling returns and handling cash delivery. Most people, still almost 80%, still paying cash on delivery. So there's a whole other issue of cash management and picking up that cash and dealing with returns. So I would say there are people with expertise and of significant scale already that could do that job for them far better.
Yeah, so better to outsource. Okay, just another question here, picking up on one of the things you highlighted, how Vietnam, given its rapid development from what is still, I suppose, a relatively low base of incomes per capita compared to other countries, is in a position to leapfrog stages of development or even, I suppose, entire product suites compared to what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years in other countries. I mean, can you identify any sort of specific products or areas where, you know, if somebody's thinking of trying to bring this product into Vietnam right now, you would just say don't, because it's just not going to happen. We're going to go straight beyond to the next level or the next product.
I mean, the best example to me is, I mean, it's products that are here from Visa and MasterCard and others, but is the credit card. Even the debit card. Most consumers don't realize that the card they have in their wallet, which they think is just an ATM card, is also a debit card, and they don't use it as a debit card. And the credit card penetration is very low, and the transactions are very low. And I think that whole genre is going to be skipped. Of course, Visa and Master will do things in the digital payment space themselves, but that's a great example. A historic example would be most people don't have a fixed line telephone. Never been in their home. People are moving to internet televisions or internet connected televisions. People are moving to smart devices in the home. You know, would I introduce a vacuum cleaner that I have to push, or would I take the robotic kind from that is already available in the market that does it for you? I think there are examples in food, there are examples in beverages, durables, and so forth.
Okay, great. Maybe we have time just for one more question. And here's an interesting one that's just come in. I mean, we appreciate that you and your business have very deep experience in Vietnam, but you also have a lot of experience in consumer industry around the region. How is the current situation, and how has the situation changed for foreign consumer goods companies trying to break into and enter the Vietnamese market? I mean, is that something that's got easier over time, and how does it compare with other countries in the region?
So honestly, whilst my business has offices around the region, my focus is really here in Indonesia, so I can talk to those. It's getting a lot harder. The cost of entry into the Vietnamese marketplace has become a lot harder. Even finding a lot of our clients have issues finding distributors that are just willing to work with them. Primarily because those distributors get approached by so many people and are made so many promises that never materialize, that they become a little bit tired of the inquiries. So getting into the retailers is getting more expensive. Product placement is getting more expensive. You don't just get put on the shelf. You have to pay to be on the shelf. So getting listed is becoming far more expensive. Despite the rise in modern trade, if I want to distribute to central outlets, Big C and Tops, I still need to visit every store manager. I can't just deal with a centralized person. So, you know, distribution and the route to market is probably the hardest point of access, and that's getting a lot harder and has gotten a lot harder, despite the rise of modern trade and despite the rise of e-commerce.
Thank you. Okay, unfortunately we're out of time, but that's been a fantastic presentation, and Richard, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, and thank you also to everyone else who attended and participated online.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for having me, Alison.
Thank you.